Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I still can't believe my own sister tricked my mom into signing away her house, kicked her out, and then had the audacity to demand I share my inheritance with her. The worst part? That was just the beginning. It was supposed to be a regular family dinner, nothing out of the ordinary. Mom had invited us over to her house, the same house where my sister Kelly and I had grown up. That house wasn't just a structure. It was a part of our family's identity. Every corner held a memory. Birthday parties in the backyard, movie nights in the living room, and the way Mom would always sit in her favorite spot by the kitchen window with a cup of tea. For her to still be there at 75, surrounded by everything she'd worked for her whole life, felt right. When I arrived, the familiar smell of roast chicken greeted me. Mom had outdone herself, as always, and the table was already set with her best dishes. Kelly was already there, standing near the counter, flipping through this thick folder in her hands. It wasn't just some casual stack of papers. It looked important, official even. She waved it at me when I walked in, her tone light, almost dismissive. "Oh, this," she said, holding up the folder. "Just some paperwork for Mom to look at later. Nothing exciting. I didn't think much of it at the time." Kelly was always the one taking charge of things, especially when it came to anything practical or financial. She'd always been that way, the responsible one, the one who stepped up first. I figured it was something boring and bureaucratic like a tax form or insurance renewal. Little did I know, it was the beginning of something far more sinister. Dinner went by smoothly, at least on the surface. Mom was her usual bubbly self, asking about my job, telling stories about her friends from her knitting group, and laughing at every joke Kelly or I made. She seemed happy, completely unaware of the storm brewing under her own roof. Kelly, though, was different that night. Normally, she was the one driving the conversation, sharing her latest work drama or bragging about her garden. But that evening, she was oddly quiet. She kept glancing at her phone and fiddling with the folder she brought, like it was burning a hole in her hands. After we finished eating, while Mom was clearing plates in the kitchen, Kelly grabbed my arm and led me into the hallway. She lowered her voice, as if she didn't want Mom to overhear. "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about something," she started. "Okay," I said, caught off guard. "What's up?" "I've been helping Mom with her finances lately," Kelly said, her tone casual, like she was mentioning the weather. That stopped me in my tracks. "Since when?" I asked. "She asked me," Kelly replied quickly, brushing it off like it was no big deal. "You know how overwhelmed she gets with this stuff? Bills, property taxes, the works. I'm just helping her keep everything organized." It sounded harmless enough, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. "Mom never mentioned anything about needing help," I said, narrowing my eyes. Kelly sighed like I was being difficult. "Come on, you know how she is. She doesn't like to admit when she's stressed. I'm just trying to make things easier for her." "Okay. You'd do the same if you were in my shoes." I didn't push it. Kelly had always been the type to take control of situations, and I figured Mom probably went along with it just to keep the peace. That was always Mom's way, avoiding conflict, especially between her kids. I let it go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than Kelly was letting on. The rest of the evening was uneventful. We laughed, shared old family stories, and reminisced about the good times we'd had in that very house. Kelly seemed to relax a little as the night went on, and for a while, everything felt normal again. Before leaving, Kelly handed Mom the folder. "Just look it over when you get a chance," she said lightly. "It's all pretty straightforward." Mom didn't seem particularly interested. She placed the folder on the counter without even glancing at it. "All right, dear. I'll get to it later," she said with a smile. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but replay my conversation with Kelly in my head. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I figured I was just overthinking things. After all, Kelly had always been good with money and paperwork. If Mom trusted her, maybe I should too. What I didn't know then was that Kelly had been working on this for weeks, maybe even months. She'd been planting seeds in Mom's mind, telling her that she needed to protect her assets and making it sound like signing over the house was just a formality. Kelly had spun it so perfectly that Mom thought she was being responsible, doing what was best for everyone. I had no idea that folder contained the documents that would transfer ownership of the house to Kelly. I had no idea that Kelly's plan was already in motion. And I had no idea that by the time I walked out of Mom's house that night, everything we thought was secure, our family's history, Mom's future, was already slipping away. But the strangest part? Mom didn't even seem worried. At least, not yet. She had no idea what she'd been roped into, and neither did I. If I'd known then what I know now, I wouldn't have left that house without taking that folder straight to a lawyer. But hindsight is always 2020, isn't it? At the time, it just felt like a regular family dinner. Little did I know it was the calm before the storm. It was a few months after that dinner when my phone rang, and I saw Mom's name on the screen. I smiled, expecting a casual chat or an update on our knitting group. But the moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was shaky, and I could hear her sniffing like she'd been crying. "Honey," she started, her voice cracking. "I don't know what to do." "Mom, what's wrong?" I asked, already on edge. "It's Kelly," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "She's telling me I need to move out of the house because she needs to sell it. She says it's falling apart, and it's better if I just let it go." I froze. "What? What do you mean she needs to sell it?" "It's your house, Mom. She can't just sell it." There was a long pause before Mom spoke again. Her next words hit me like a freight train. "I signed the deed over to her a few months ago." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. "You what?" "She said it was just paperwork," Mom said, her voice breaking again. "She told me it was to make things easier in case something happened to me." I didn't know. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart was pounding and my mind was racing. "Mom, why would you sign something like that without asking me or a lawyer to look at it?" "I trusted her," Mom said simply, and it was like a dagger to the chest. The anger surged through me as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "I'm coming over," I said firmly. "Don't do anything. Don't sign anything else. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I pulled up to Mom's house, Kelly's car was already parked in the driveway. My hands were shaking as I walked up to the door, but I didn't bother knocking. I let myself in and found Mom sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. Kelly was in the kitchen, casually sipping a cup of tea like nothing was wrong. When she saw me, she raised an eyebrow. "Oh, hey, didn't know you were coming by." I didn't even bother with pleasantries. "What the hell is going on, Kelly?" I demanded. She looked at me, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Mom just told me you've been pressuring her to move out of her own house, and that you made her sign the deed over to you." "Care to explain?" Kelly sighed dramatically, like I was blowing things out of proportion. "Look, this house is falling apart," she said, waving a hand around. "The roof needs repairs, the plumbing is ancient, and Mom can't keep up with the maintenance. I'm just trying to help her out. By taking her house and kicking her out?" I shot back. "She's not being kicked out," Kelly said defensively. "She'll find a nice place to live, somewhere smaller, easier to manage. This house is too much for her." Mom spoke up from the couch, her voice trembling. "I don't want to leave, Kelly. This is my home." Kelly turned to her, her tone suddenly sharp. "Mom, we've talked about this. You can't stay here forever. It's not practical. I'm doing this for you, whether you see it or not." I couldn't believe her audacity. "You're doing this for her?" I scoffed. "You're selling the house to help yourself, Kelly. Don't pretend this is some noble act." Kelly's face hardened. "You don't understand. I've been the one taking care of her finances, making sure everything's in order. What have you done? You just show up for dinner and act like you're the golden child." "This isn't about me," I snapped. "This is about you taking advantage of Mom. You knew she wouldn't understand what she was signing, and you used that to your advantage." Kelly crossed her arms, clearly done with the conversation. "The house is in my name now. Legally, it's mine. There's nothing you can do about it." After Kelly left, I sat with Mom, trying to piece together exactly what had happened. She told me about how Kelly had been coming over more often, talking about protecting her assets and streamlining things. She made it sound like it was just a safety net, Mom said, her hands twisting in her lap, like it was something people do to prepare for the future. I didn't think she'd take it from me. Hearing her say that broke my heart. This was our Mom, the woman who had worked so hard to give us everything, who had always been there for us, and Kelly had betrayed her in the worst way possible. "Mom, don't worry," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We're going to fix this. I don't care what Kelly says or what papers she's got. She's not getting away with this." But as I sat there, watching Mom wipe away tears, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. Kelly had made sure everything was legal, and she was right about one thing. The house was in her name now. It wasn't going to be easy to undo what she'd done. Still, one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Kelly bully Mom into leaving her home. She might have had the upper hand for now, but this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Watching my mom pack her belongings was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. The sight of her shuffling around her own bedroom, trying to decide what to take and what to leave behind, broke something in me. This was the same woman who used to fold our laundry while singing along to oldies. the one who'd always been our anchor, no matter what storms life threw at us. Now, her hands trembled as she picked up a small jewelry box, clutching it to her chest like it was all she had left. "I never thought Kelly would do this to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I raised her better than this. Didn't I?" I didn't know what to say. What could I say? The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal, emotional, and devastating on a level that words couldn't touch. Every time I tried to reason with Kelly, it was like talking to a wall. "Mom doesn't need to move out," I argued during one of our many heated confrontations. "You've got the house in your name now, fine. But let her stay here." Kelly rolled her eyes, as if I were being unreasonable. "It's not that simple," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "The house needs so much work. It's better for everyone if it's sold now, while it still has value." "For everyone?" I shot back. "Or for you?" Kelly didn't even flinch. "I'm doing what's best for the family," she said coolly. "Mom can't take care of this place anymore. It's too big for her, and she's not as young as she used to be. She needs something smaller, more manageable. And where exactly is she supposed to go?" I demanded. Kelly shrugged like it wasn't her problem. "She can live with you, can't she?" That's when it hit me. Kelly had planned this all along. From the moment she convinced Mom to sign the house over, she'd known this was where it would lead. She'd take the house for herself, pocket the profits from selling it, and dump all the responsibility from Mom onto me. It wasn't just selfish. It was cruel. As the days went by, Kelly's determination to sell the house only grew stronger. She started bringing real estate agents by, walking them through the property like she owned it, which legally she did. It was surreal watching strangers evaluate the home where we'd grown up, talking about potential renovations and modernizing the kitchen like it was just another project. Mom tried to stay out of their way, retreating to her bedroom whenever Kelly came over with someone new. But I could see how much it was wearing on her. She stopped eating as much, and her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced with a kind of quiet sadness that I'd never seen before. One afternoon, while we were packing up the living room, Mom sat down on the couch and stared at a photo of the three of us from years ago. It was from a Christmas morning back when Kelly and I were teenagers. We were both wearing goofy matching sweaters that Mom had made, and Kelly was laughing so hard that her face was red. "I don't understand," Mom said softly, her eyes brimming with tears. "How did we get here? What did I do wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom," I said, sitting down beside her. "This is on Kelly, not you." "But she's my daughter," Mom whispered. "How could she do this to her own family?" I didn't have an answer for her. All I could do was hug her and promise that we'd figure something out. The day Kelly officially listed the house was a turning point. She came over unannounced, holding a folder full of documents and wearing that same smug expression that made me want to scream. "It's done," she announced, handing Mom a copy of the listing. "The house is on the market. I've already had a couple of inquiries, so we need to start thinking about where you're going to live." Mom didn't say anything. She just nodded numbly, like she'd resigned herself to the fact that she had no say in the matter. I wasn't as calm. "You couldn't even wait until she found a new place before putting it up for sale?" I snapped. Kelly sighed like I was exhausting her. "She'll have plenty of time to figure it out," she said dismissively. "The market's competitive, and these things take a while. She's not some tenant you can just evict, Kelly," I said, my voice rising. "She's our mother." Kelly's face hardened. "And she's lucky I'm even dealing with all this. If it weren't for me, the house would have fallen apart years ago. That was the last straw." "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Get out. You've done enough damage." Kelly opened her mouth to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. In the days that followed, I started to see just how much of a toll this was taking on Mom. Every box she packed felt like another piece of her life being stripped away. She kept apologizing to me over and over, as if this whole mess was somehow her fault. "I never should have signed those papers," she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't want to upset her. I thought I was doing the right thing." "It's not your fault," I told her firmly. "Kelly manipulated you. She knew exactly what she was doing. But now you're the one stuck dealing with all of this," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm supposed to take care of you, not the other way around." I hugged her tightly, wishing I could take away her pain. "We'll get through this, Mom," I said, even though I wasn't sure how. "We're going to figure this out. I promise." But deep down, I knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Kelly had made sure of that. She'd taken what wasn't hers, and now she was trying to force Mom out of the home she'd lived in for decades. For the first time in my life, I saw Kelly for who she really was, not the responsible older sister I'd always looked up to, but someone who cared more about herself than the people who loved her. And as much as it hurt, I knew we couldn't let her get away with it. Not without a fight. After watching Mom pack her life into cardboard boxes and seeing the sadness in her eyes, I knew I couldn't let this slide. Kelly had done something awful, but I didn't fully understand just how deep the betrayal went until I started digging. What I uncovered made my stomach churn. It began with a simple question. Mom, do you still have the paperwork Kelly gave you? I asked one evening while helping her sort through some of her things. Mom looked hesitant. I think so, she said. It might be in the desk in the living room. I found the folder shoved into a drawer, buried under old receipts and a half-finished crossword puzzle. As I flipped through the documents, my heart sank. The paperwork wasn't just a casual agreement. It was an official transfer of ownership. Kelly now owned the house outright. Mom's signature was there in black ink, but there were no explanations, no notes, nothing to suggest she'd had any idea what she was agreeing to. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, did you read any of this before you signed it? She looked at me with tired eyes. Kelly said it was just to protect the house in case something happened to me. She said it was better this way, so there wouldn't be any confusion later on. I clenched my jaw, trying not to lose my temper. Did she explain any of this to you? She told me not to worry about it, Mom admitted. She said she was taking care of everything. I spent the next few hours poring over the documents, and the more I read, the worse it got. Kelly had covered her tracks well. The language was dense and full of legal jargon that would confuse anyone without a background in real estate or law. It was clear she'd gone out of her way to make it impossible for Mom to understand what she was signing. The real punch to the gut came when I noticed a line buried in the fine print. Kelly had already taken out a loan against the house's equity, a large loan. That's when it hit me. She wasn't selling the house to help Mom or because it needed repairs. She was doing it to pay off her own debts. My hands shook as I held the papers. Kelly hadn't just betrayed Mom's trust. She'd used her to secure a financial lifeline for herself, all while pretending to act in her best interest. It was despicable. I couldn't sit on this. I needed answers. The next day, I called Kelly and asked her to meet me for coffee. She agreed, sounding chipper, like everything was fine. When she walked into the cafe, I didn't waste any time. What the hell is this? I asked, sliding a copy of the documents across the table toward her. Kelly glanced at them, then looked back at me with an expression that was a mix of boredom and annoyance. Oh, come on. Don't make a scene, she said, waving her hand dismissively. Don't make a scene? I repeated, my voice low but full of anger. You lied to Mom. You tricked her into signing her house over to you. And now you're using it to pay off your debts? What the hell, Kelly? She rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. Mom doesn't need that big house anymore. She's getting older. It's too much for her to handle. This isn't about the house, I shot back. This is about you. You didn't do this to help her. You did it to help yourself. Kelly shrugged, completely unfazed. So what if I took out a loan? The house is worth a lot. It'll sell for more than enough to cover it. You're unbelievable, I said, leaning forward. Do you even hear yourself? Mom trusted you, and you used her. You're throwing her out of her own home so you can clean up your financial mess. Kelly smirked, which only made my blood boil. You make it sound so sinister, she said. I'm doing what's best for everyone. The house isn't practical for her anymore, and she's better off without the stress. Besides, it's not like you were stepping up to help. There it was, the dig I'd been expecting. Kelly loved to paint herself as the martyr, the one who carried the weight of the family while everyone else stood by. Don't you dare, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Don't you dare try to make this about me. I've been here for Mom. I didn't swoop in and steal her house under false pretenses. Kelly leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You're overreacting. Legally, the house is mine now. There's nothing you can do about it. Her words rang in my ears long after I left the cafe. I couldn't believe how cold she was, how little remorse she seemed to feel for what she'd done. But I wasn't about to give up. That night, I went back through the documents with a fine-toothed comb. I didn't have a legal background, but I knew enough to see that while Kelly had covered her tracks well, there might be a way to challenge the agreement. Mom had signed the papers under false pretenses, and if we could prove that Kelly had intentionally misled her, there was a chance we could fight back. I decided to call a lawyer, someone who could help us make sense of everything and figure out what options we had. But even as I started putting together a plan, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about justice, about standing up for Mom and making sure Kelly faced the consequences of her actions. One thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. She might have the law on her side for now, but I had something stronger. I had the truth, and I was going to use it to fight for what was right, no matter how long it took. It didn't take long for the family grapevine to light up with news of what Kelly had done. At first, I tried to keep the details under wraps. This wasn't the kind of thing you wanted to share with everyone. But once I started reaching out to see if anyone could offer advice or help, the story began to spread. And as families do, everyone had an opinion. Some people were as outraged as I was. "That's awful," my cousin Lisa said when I told her what happened. "How could Kelly do something like that to Aunt Mary? She's always been so sweet." Lisa offered to help in any way she could, even if that just meant being there to listen. But not everyone was so supportive. My Aunt Carol, who had always been close to Kelly, dismissed the whole thing as a misunderstanding. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," she said over the phone. "It's not like you were planning to live in the house, so why do you even care?" "It's not about me," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "It's about Mom. This is her home. She trusted Kelly, and now she's being forced out." Carol didn't seem convinced. "Kelly's probably just trying to make things easier for everyone. Houses are a lot of work, and Mary's not getting any younger. Maybe you're looking at this the wrong way." "The wrong way?" I repeated, incredulous. "She took advantage of Mom. How is there any right way to look at that?" "Well," Carol said, her voice tight with judgment, "it's not like your mom is homeless. She's staying with you, isn't she?" That comment cut deep. It wasn't just the dismissal of what Kelly had done. It was the implication that as long as Mom wasn't on the streets, everything was fine. The family quickly divided into two camps: those who saw Kelly's actions for what they were, and those who tried to justify them. Some people even tried to play the middle ground, offering half-hearted excuses for her behavior. "Maybe Kelly really thought she was helping," one cousin suggested during a phone call. "You know how she's always been the responsible one. Maybe she just made a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated. "She convinced Mom to sign over the house and took out a loan against it." "That's not a mistake. That's a plan." "Well," the cousin said awkwardly, "maybe it wasn't the best decision, but it sounds like she had good intentions." I wanted to scream. Why was it so hard for people to see what was really happening? Kelly hadn't just made a bad decision. She had betrayed our mother in the worst possible way. But for some reason, people kept looking for ways to excuse her behavior. Meanwhile, Mom was staying in my guest room, and it was clear she wasn't doing well. She tried to keep a brave face, but I could see how much this was affecting her. She didn't sleep much, and when she did, I often found her lying awake in the morning, staring at the ceiling like she couldn't believe this was her reality. She avoided talking about Kelly altogether, but every once in a while, something would slip. "I just don't understand," she said one evening as we sat on the couch watching TV. "How could she do this? I never thought Kelly would treat me like this." "She's selfish, Mom," I said gently. "She only cares about herself." Mom shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But she's my daughter. I raised her. I thought I taught her better than this." Hearing her say that broke my heart. I hated that Kelly's actions had made Mom question herself, as if this was somehow her fault. It wasn't. The blame rested squarely on Kelly's shoulders. The tension in the family reached a boiling point when we had a gathering for my uncle's birthday. I debated whether or not to go, knowing Kelly would be there, but in the end, I decided I wasn't going to let her scare me off. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the room shift. Some people greeted me warmly, but others avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable. Kelly, of course, was sitting in the corner, chatting with Aunt Carol like nothing had happened. I tried to avoid her, but it didn't take long for her to make her move. She walked over with a glass of wine in hand, her expression a mix of smugness and feigned concern. "How's Mom doing?" she asked casually, as if she hadn't been the one to put her in this position. "She's fine," I said curtly, not wanting to engage. "That's good," Kelly said, taking a sip of her wine. "You know, this whole thing has been really hard on me too. I'm just trying to do what's best for everyone." I couldn't hold back anymore. "What's best for everyone? Are you serious right now? You stole Mom's house, Kelly. You're the reason she's going through this." Kelly's face hardened, but she kept her tone calm, like she was trying to look like the reasonable one. "I didn't steal anything. Mom signed the papers willingly. If she didn't understand what she was signing, that's not my fault." "That's exactly your fault," I shot back. "You manipulated her. You knew she trusted you, and you used that trust to take what wasn't yours." The room went quiet, and I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on us. Kelly, ever the performer, put on a wounded expression. "I can't believe you're attacking me like this," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "I've done everything I can to help Mom, and now I'm the bad guy?" "You're not the bad guy because you tried to help," I said, my voice steady. You're the bad guy because you lied to her and took advantage of her. Own it. That night, the family gathering ended with a lot of uncomfortable silences and awkward goodbyes. Some people pulled me aside to offer support, but others avoided me altogether, clearly siding with Kelly or not wanting to take a side at all. By the time I got home, I felt exhausted. Mom was already asleep in the guest room, and I sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the documents I'd been carrying around like a shield. It was clear to me now that this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a battle for the truth, a battle to make people see Kelly for who she really was. And as hard as it was to face the fractures in our family, I knew I couldn't give up. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about me. It was about protecting Mom and making sure Kelly faced the consequences of her actions. And no matter how divided the family became, I wasn't going to stop until justice was served. Just when I thought Kelly couldn't stoop any lower, she called me out of the blue one evening. I was sitting in the living room with Mom, going through some old photo albums, trying to distract her from everything that was going on. When my phone buzzed and Kelly's name popped up on the screen, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But something told me to answer. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Hey," Kelly said, her voice sugary sweet, an instant red flag. She only used that tone when she wanted something. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "What do you need, Kelly?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She laughed lightly, like we were old friends catching up. "Why do you assume I need something? Maybe I just wanted to check in." "Sure," I said dryly. "What's up?" "Well," she began, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I've been thinking about the family inheritance." I frowned, completely baffled. "What inheritance?" "You know, the heirlooms and things Mom's been holding on all these years," she said breezily. "There's some valuable stuff there, and I think it's time we talk about selling it off." My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Kelly, what are you talking about? Mom doesn't have much besides the house, which you already took, by the way. What heirlooms are you even referring to?" "The jewelry, for one," she said matter-of-factly. "And the china set. Maybe even some of those antiques in the attic. They're just sitting there collecting dust. It makes sense to sell them while they're still worth something." I was so stunned I could barely speak. "You can't be serious?" "Oh, I'm completely serious," she said, her tone shifting to that familiar condescension that made my blood boil. "It's only fair. After all, I'm the one taking on all the responsibility for Mom's future. Splitting the proceeds would help balance things out." Her audacity was staggering. "Kelly," I said slowly, trying to keep my temper in check, "you've already taken the house. You've uprooted Mom's entire life. And now you're coming for her heirlooms? Do you even hear yourself?" She didn't miss a beat. "I'm not coming for anything," she said defensively. "I'm being practical. Do you know how much it costs to manage all this? Repairs, taxes, legal fees, everything adds up. I'm just trying to make sure the burden isn't all on me." "The burden?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've made this entire situation worse for everyone. And now you're trying to make it seem like you're the victim?" Kelly sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Look, I didn't call to argue with you. I'm just saying we need to have a conversation about this. Mom's assets are part of the family's legacy, and we both have a right to them." "You have no right to anything," I snapped. "If anyone has a claim, it's Mom. And those heirlooms aren't assets. They're her memories. How can you even think about selling them?" Kelly's voice hardened. "Stop being so emotional about this. They're just things. And if we don't sell them, they'll just end up in some storage unit somewhere." After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. Mom must have noticed the look on my face because she put a hand on my arm. "What's wrong, dear?" she asked softly. I didn't want to upset her, but I couldn't keep it from her either. "Kelly wants to sell your heirlooms," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom's face fell. "What? Why?" "She says it's only fair," I explained bitterly. "Apparently, she thinks splitting the money will make up for all the responsibility she's taken on." Mom shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Those things aren't just things," she said quietly. "The jewelry belonged to my mother. And the china set, your father gave that to me on our 10th anniversary. How could she even think about selling them?" I didn't have an answer. Kelly's greed had reached a level I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't enough for her to take the house. She wanted to strip Mom of every last piece of her history. The next day, I called Kelly back, determined to put a stop to her plans. "You're not touching Mom's heirlooms," I said firmly as soon as she answered. "Excuse me," she said, feigning innocence. "You heard me," I said. "If you think I'm going to let you sell off the last remnants of Mom's life, you're out of your mind." Kelly sighed dramatically. "Why do you always have to make things so difficult? This isn't about taking anything from Mom. It's about being practical." You're acting like I'm some kind of villain. Because you are, I shot back. You've already taken enough. Leave the heirlooms alone. But Kelly wasn't backing down. You don't get to make that decision, she said coldly. If Mom has anything of value, it's part of the estate. And as her daughter, I have just as much right to it as you do. I could feel my blood pressure rising. You've lost the right to call yourself her daughter after everything you've done. Kelly laughed bitterly. Oh, please. You're acting like I'm the bad guy, but you're the one who's been sitting on the sidelines while I do all the hard work. You mean the hard work of betraying Mom and destroying her life? I said, I'm done with this conversation, Kelly snapped. If you want to be a martyr, go ahead. But I'm not going to apologize for doing what needs to be done. After the call, I felt a mix of rage and helplessness. Kelly was relentless, and I knew she wasn't going to let this go. But if she thought I was going to stand by and let her take anything else from Mom, she had another thing coming. This wasn't just about the heirlooms anymore. It was about standing up to Kelly's greed and protecting what little Mom had left. And no matter how hard it got, I wasn't going to back down. After weeks of sleepless nights, endless arguments, and watching Mom lose more of herself every day, I knew I had to do something. Kelly's grip on the situation was suffocating, and I felt powerless to stop it. But one evening, as I sat at the kitchen table flipping through the dreaded stack of documents Kelly had tricked Mom into signing, a thought struck me. Maybe there was something in the fine print we could use against her. The next morning, I started looking for a lawyer. I wanted someone with experience in elder law, someone who had seen situations like this before and knew how to fight back. After a few phone calls and consultations, I found Mr. Anderson, a soft-spoken but sharp attorney who had dealt with more than his fair share of family disputes. When I laid out everything that had happened, Mr. Anderson listened carefully, taking notes as I spoke. He didn't interrupt or judge, which was a relief after feeling like so many people in my family had tried to minimize the situation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a small sigh. I won't lie to you, he said. This is a tough situation. Your sister has made sure the documents are legally binding, and your mother did sign them willingly. My heart sank. So there's nothing we can do? I didn't say that, he replied, holding up a hand. It's difficult, but not impossible. There's one thing that might work depending on the circumstances. If we can prove that your mother didn't fully understand what she was signing, there's a chance we could argue the agreement is void. He went on to explain that the law offered some protections for situations like this, especially when elder abuse or manipulation was involved. If your sister misled your mother, or if she used confusing language to take advantage of her lack of understanding, we can make a case that the transfer of the house was invalid, he said. I felt a flicker of hope, but I didn't want to get my hopes up too high. How do we prove something like that? I asked. It's not easy, Mr. Anderson admitted. We'd need evidence, texts, emails, anything that shows your sister's intent. Witnesses who can testify to your mother's state of mind at the time could also help. And of course, your mother's own testimony will be crucial. That last part worried me. Mom was still so shaken by everything that had happened. The idea of her having to relive it all in a courtroom was almost too much to bear. But when I told her about the possibility of fighting back, something in her changed. For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark of hope in her eyes. Do you really think we can fix this? She asked, her voice trembling with emotion. It's not guaranteed, I said honestly. But it's something, and it's worth trying, isn't it? Mom nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. I can't let her get away with this. Hearing her say that filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. Mom had always been the glue that held our family together, and seeing her so defeated had been unbearable. Now, though, it felt like she was starting to fight back, and I was determined to stand by her side. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Mr. Anderson asked me to gather as much evidence as possible, so I started digging through old emails, texts, and anything else I could find that might show Kelly's true intentions. I also reached out to a few family members who had witnessed Kelly's behavior over the years, hoping they might be willing to testify. One evening, as I was combing through Mom's phone, I found a series of texts from Kelly that made my blood boil. In one message, she had written, "Don't worry about the details, Mom. This is just a formality to protect the house. Trust me." In another, she had said, "You don't need to read everything. I've already gone over it all. Just sign where I'm marked." I forwarded the messages to Mr. Anderson immediately. When I showed them to Mom, she shook her head sadly. "I should have known better," she said. "It's not your fault," I told her firmly. "She took advantage of you. But now we're going to make it right." As the court date approached, I could feel the tension building. Kelly, of course, was furious when she found out we were challenging the agreement. She called me up one evening, her voice dripping with venom. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said. "After everything I've done for Mom, you're turning this into a circus? Do you have any idea how much stress this is causing her?" "Don't pretend you care about Mom's stress," I snapped. "This is your fault, Kelly. You're the one who put her in this position. You're such a hypocrite," she hissed. "Where were you when Mom needed help with her finances? I was the one who stepped up, and now you're trying to make me out to be the bad guy." "You were the bad guy," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "And if you think you're going to get away with this, you're in for a surprise." Despite Kelly's attempts to intimidate me, I refused to back down. The day of the hearing finally arrived, and walking into that courtroom felt like stepping onto a battlefield. Kelly sat on one side, flanked by her lawyer, while Mom and I sat with Mr. Anderson. Mom looked nervous but determined. When it was her turn to testify, she spoke from the heart, explaining how much she had trusted Kelly and how little she had understood about what she was signing. "I thought I was protecting my home," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't realize I was giving it away." Mr. Anderson presented the text from Kelly, along with other pieces of evidence that painted a clear picture of manipulation. By the time he finished his argument, I could see the cracks forming in Kelly's defense. As we left the courtroom that day, I felt a cautious sense of optimism. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time, it felt like we had a real chance of winning. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Mom smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on me." "We're not done yet," I said, squeezing her hand. "But we're getting there." And in that moment, I knew we were on the right path. The day I told Kelly we were taking legal action is one I'll never forget. I'd been dreading the conversation, knowing how she'd react. But at the same time, I couldn't wait to see her face when she realized that her actions weren't going unchecked. I called her up and asked her to meet me at a neutral spot, a park near Mom's old house. Kelly arrived, wearing her usual smug expression, like she thought she was untouchable. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. I got straight to the point. "We're taking you to court," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. Kelly blinked, clearly taken aback for a split second, but then she laughed. "You can't be serious," she said, shaking her head. "Oh, I'm dead serious," I replied. "We've got a lawyer, and we're challenging the legality of the transfer. You tricked Mom into signing those papers, and we're going to prove it." She crossed her arms, her smile fading. "Good luck with that. Mom signed willingly, and I didn't do anything illegal." "You're wasting your time." "Maybe," I said, shrugging. "But we've got evidence. Texts, witnesses, and Mom's testimony. And even if we don't win, at least the whole family will know exactly what kind of person you are." Kelly's confidence faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, putting on a mask of indifference. "Go ahead," she said. "Do your worst. You don't stand a chance." The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. Mr. Anderson worked tirelessly, building our case piece by piece. He requested financial records, reviewed the loan Kelly had taken out against the house, and compiled the text messages we'd found. He even interviewed a few of Mom's friends, who confirmed that she'd been confused and overwhelmed during the time Kelly was pressuring her to sign the papers. As the court date approached, I started to notice cracks in Kelly's armor. She wasn't as smug as she'd been before. Instead of brushing us off, she started calling and texting me, trying to talk things out. "Look," she said during one of her calls, "this has gotten way out of hand. There's no need to involve lawyers. Let's just work something out between us." "You mean let you get away with it?" I shot back. "Not a chance." Kelly's tone turned icy. "You're making a mistake," she said. "This is going to backfire on you, and you'll end up regretting it." But I wasn't intimidated. For once, it felt like the power was shifting, and I wasn't about to let her scare me into backing down. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, the tension was palpable. Mom and I sat with Mr. Anderson in the courtroom, while Kelly sat on the opposite side with her lawyer. She avoided eye contact with us, instead focusing on her phone as if she didn't have a care in the world. The proceedings began, and Mr. Anderson wasted no time laying out our case. He described how Kelly had manipulated Mom, using her trust and confusion to gain control of the house. He presented the text messages as evidence, showing how Kelly had downplayed the significance of the documents and misled Mom about what she was signing. When it was Mom's turn to testify, my heart ached watching her take the stand. She looked so small and vulnerable sitting there, but when she spoke, her voice was clear and unwavering. "I thought I was signing something to protect my home," she said. "Kelly told me it was just a formality, and I trusted her. I didn't realize I was giving up ownership." Kelly's lawyer tried to paint Mom as forgetful and overly emotional, suggesting that she might have misunderstood the situation because of her age. But Mr. Anderson countered with the text messages, pointing out how Kelly had deliberately avoided explaining the details of the agreement. "Miss Kelly," the judge said at one point, addressing my sister directly, "why didn't you encourage your mother to seek independent legal advice before signing these documents?" Kelly shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I didn't think it was necessary," she said weakly. "That's convenient," the judge replied, raising an eyebrow. As the hearing went on, it became increasingly clear that Kelly's case was falling apart. Her excuses sounded hollow, and her attempts to paint herself as the responsible one only made her look worse. By the time the closing arguments were made, I could see the tension in her face. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "The court finds that the transfer of ownership was made under false pretenses," the judge said. "The deed will be returned to the original owner, Mary, and Kelly is ordered to repay the money taken out against the property." I couldn't believe it. After everything we'd been through, we had won. Mom's house was hers again. As we left the courtroom, I turned to Mom and saw tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. "We did it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No, Mom," I said, hugging her tightly. "You did it. You stood up for yourself." Kelly, meanwhile, stormed out of the courtroom without a word. She didn't even look at us as she left, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. It wasn't the end of the story. There were still loose ends to tie up, and I knew it would take time for Mom to fully heal from everything that had happened. But in that moment, it felt like we had finally taken back control. For the first time in what felt like forever, things were starting to look up. And as we walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, I couldn't help but feel proud of Mom, and of us for fighting back. Getting the house back felt like a massive weight had been lifted. I'll never forget the look on Mom's face when she walked back into her home, her name officially restored as the rightful owner. She stood in the entryway for a long time, just looking around, her fingers grazing the edges of the doorway like she was reconnecting with an old friend. "It's really mine again," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and relief. "It's always been yours, Mom," I said, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Kelly just tried to take what wasn't hers. But while the legal victory was a relief, it didn't undo the damage. The emotional toll of the whole ordeal lingered like a shadow over everything. Mom couldn't bring herself to fully unpack her things, even though the court had ruled in her favor. It was like a part of her was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Kelly to find some new way to pull the rug out from under her. Kelly's reaction to the court ruling was as infuriating as you'd expect. A few days after the verdict, she called me up, her voice dripping with what I could only describe as a mix of faux regret and barely contained bitterness. "I just want to say I'm sorry," she said, though her tone lacked any real sincerity. "For what?" I asked bluntly, unwilling to let her off the hook. "For everything," she said vaguely. "I never meant for things to get this bad." I almost laughed. "You didn't mean for things to get this bad? Kelly, you lied to Mom, took her house, and tried to sell off her memories to cover your debts. What exactly were you expecting to happen?" She sighed, clearly annoyed that I wasn't accepting her weak attempt at an apology. "Look, I made a mistake, okay? But I was trying to help her. The house was too much for her to handle, and I thought selling it would be better in the long run." "You didn't think about Mom at all," I shot back. "You thought about yourself. And now you're upset because your plan didn't work out." Kelly didn't respond for a moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was sharp. "You're not perfect either, you know. You're acting like you've been some kind of saint in all of this." "Maybe I'm not perfect," I said, "but at least I didn't betray my own mother." That was the last conversation I had with Kelly for a long time. She tried to spin the narrative to the rest of the family, painting herself as the victim of a misunderstanding. But the court ruling had made it clear who was in the wrong. Most of the family sided with Mom after everything came out, but a few still tried to defend Kelly. "It's not like she's a bad person," Aunt Carol said during one particularly frustrating phone call. "Maybe she made a bad decision, but her intentions were good." "Good intentions?" I said, barely able to contain my anger. "She stole from Mom, Carol. What part of that sounds like good intentions to you?" "Well," Carol said hesitantly, "maybe she really thought she was helping. And let's be honest, Mary hasn't exactly been in the best position to take care of the house." "This isn't about the house," I snapped. "It's about the fact that Kelly lied and manipulated her own mother for money. Stop making excuses for her." It was exhausting trying to make people see the truth. It's funny how some people will twist themselves into knots to avoid admitting that someone they care about did something awful. Despite the lingering tension with the family, Mom started to regain her footing little by little. After a lot of soul-searching, she made the decision to sell the house. But this time, it was on her own terms. I think it's time for a fresh start, she told me one evening as we sat in the living room, the warm glow of the sunset streaming through the windows. This house has too many memories, good and bad. I think I need to move on. I nodded, understanding where she was coming from. Do you know where you want to go? I've been looking at a few apartments closer to you, she said with a small smile. Something smaller, more manageable. I think it'll be good for me. Helping Mom prepare the house for sale was bittersweet. As we packed up boxes and sorted through decades of memories, it felt like we were closing a chapter of our lives. There were moments of laughter as we uncovered old photos and trinkets, but there were also moments of sadness as Mom said goodbye to the place she called home for so long. When the house finally sold, Mom looked both relieved and emotional. It's strange, she said as we stood in the empty living room on the day of the closing. I thought I'd feel more sad, but I don't. I think I'm ready for this. I think you are too, I said, hugging her tightly. As for Kelly, she disappeared from the picture for a while. She didn't show up at family gatherings, and I didn't go out of my way to contact her. Every now and then, I'd hear through the grapevine that she was still bitter about losing the court case, but I didn't care. Mom's new apartment turned out to be the fresh start she needed. It was cozy and filled with light, and she quickly made it her own with her favorite plants and pictures of the family. Minus Kelly, of course. Watching her rebuild her life after everything she'd been through was inspiring. She showed more strength and resilience than I'd ever thought possible, and it made me proud to call her my mom. But no matter how far we moved forward, there was one thing I couldn't forget: the look on Mom's face when she realized what Kelly had done to her. It was a betrayal that cut so deep, it would take a lifetime to fully heal. And while Mom might one day find it in her heart to forgive, I wasn't sure I ever could. Because some wounds don't just heal, they leave scars. It's been a little over a year since the court case, and Mom's life looks completely different now. She moved into a cozy little apartment not far from me, and for the first time in years, she seems genuinely happy. The apartment is small but bright, with big windows that let in plenty of sunlight and a balcony where she keeps a few potted plants. The place feels like it was made for her. She's filled it with things that make her happy: photos of the grandkids, her favorite cozy blankets, and a bookshelf overflowing with novels she's been meaning to read for years. Every time I visit, she greets me with a smile that feels lighter than it did when she was living under the shadow of Kelly's betrayal. I didn't think I'd ever feel this at peace again, she told me one evening as we sat on her balcony, sipping tea. I thought losing the house would break me, but it didn't. It made me realize that it's not the house that matters. It's the people in your life who care about you. Her words stuck with me, especially because they were such a stark contrast to where we'd been a year ago. Back then, she'd been a shell of herself, weighed down by guilt, betrayal, and uncertainty. Now, she was starting to rebuild, not just her life, but her sense of self-worth. As for Kelly, she's faded into the background of our lives. We don't talk much anymore, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Every now and then, I'll hear through the family grapevine that she's still bitter about the court case, still telling people she was just trying to help. She says you blew the whole thing out of proportion, my cousin Lisa told me at a recent family gathering. She still thinks she did nothing wrong. I laughed bitterly when I heard that. Of course she does. Kelly's never been one to admit when she's wrong. But even though Kelly's absence has created a strange gap in the family dynamic, I've learned to stop worrying about it. I spent too much time and energy trying to make sense of her actions, trying to understand how she could betray her own mother like that. In the end, I realized that some people simply refuse to see the harm they've caused, no matter how obvious it is to everyone else. And while I can't control how Kelly chooses to live her life, I can control how I protect myself and Mom from her toxicity. There are still moments when I think about what might have happened if I hadn't stepped in. It's a chilling thought. Mom could have lost everything. The house, her financial stability, her sense of security. It all could have been taken from her because she trusted someone who didn't deserve it. But instead of dwelling on the what-ifs, I try to focus on the lessons I've learned. The biggest one? Family isn't just about blood. It's about trust. The people you call family should be the ones who lift you up, not tear you down. And while it's painful to accept that someone you love is capable of hurting you, it's also freeing to know that you can set boundaries and choose who you allow into your life. For all the pain Kelly caused, this ordeal brought me and Mom closer than ever. We've had conversations we never would have had before, and I've come to appreciate her resilience in a way I never fully understood. Mom has started volunteering at the local community center, helping organize events and teaching knitting classes to seniors. She says it gives her purpose, something to focus on besides the past. It's funny, she said one day, smiling as she held up a half-finished scarf. I spent so much time worrying about losing the house, but now that it's gone, I feel like I've gained so much more. My peace of mind, my independence, it's worth more than anything I left behind. Hearing her say that made me realize just how far we'd come. The house, for all its history and sentimental value, had become a symbol of everything we'd lost because of Kelly. Letting it go allowed us to move forward, to rebuild on our own terms. Every now and then, a family member will bring up Kelly, wondering if we'll ever reconcile. I don't have an answer for that. Maybe one day, Mom will find it in her heart to forgive her, but I'm not there yet. For now, I'm focused on the future, on helping Mom enjoy this new chapter of her life and making sure she knows she's surrounded by people who truly care about her. Because if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes family can hurt you in ways you'd never expect. But it's also family, real, genuine family that can help you pick up the pieces and start again. And for that, I'm endlessly grateful.